July 20th, 1973. Hollywood. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, the most famous action star in the world, received a phone call. Bruce Lee had died. Steve hung up the phone, walked to his bedroom, locked the door. For 6 months he barely spoke to anyone. Friends worried he was having a breakdown. His wife couldn't reach him. But Steve was carrying something, a secret Bruce had told him. Words that haunted him. Words he would take to his grave 7 years later. This is the story of that secret. And the friendship that changed both their lives. Los Angeles, 1969. A private party in Beverly Hills. Hollywood elite everywhere. Steve McQueen arrived late, 39, peak of his fame. Bullet had just made him the highest paid actor in Hollywood. The king of cool. He walked through the party, then he saw something that stopped him. In the corner, a small Asian man was demonstrating martial arts to a captivated group. Fast, explosive, precise. Be like water, formless, shapeless. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Steve walked closer. You're Bruce Lee, from the Green Hornet. And you're Steve McQueen, from everywhere. Bruce smiled. Your motorcycle chase in The Great Escape, incredible. You did that yourself? Most of it. I don't like stunt doubles. Neither do I. Real techniques, real speed. They talked for 2 hours, forgot the party, discussed philosophy, martial arts, the prison of fame. Hollywood won't cast me as the lead, Bruce said. They say American audiences won't accept an Asian hero. That's bullshit. You've got more charisma than half the leading men here. I'm thinking of going to Hong Kong, making films there, showing the world what real martial arts looks like. Steve studied him. You should. And when you come back, Hollywood will beg for you. You can't want them. They have to want you. Is that how you did it? Partly. But also, I stopped caring what they thought. Did what felt authentic. The moment you stop seeking their approval, they start seeking yours. You sound like a martial arts master talking about ego. Maybe we're not so different. You fight on screen. I fight the system. Both require knowing who you are. They exchanged numbers. Started training together. Steve came to Bruce's house. Private sessions. Bruce taught martial arts. Steve taught Hollywood politics. The secret, Steve said during training, is to make them need you more than you need them. Be so good nobody else can do it. Their friendship deepened. They'd sit in Steve's garage surrounded by motorcycles, drinking beer, talking about life. I grew up in reform schools, Steve said one evening. Foster homes. Hollywood made me somebody. But sometimes I wake up still that scared kid, wondering when they'll realize I don't belong. Bruce looked at him with understanding. I grew up in Hong Kong street fights, spent my life proving I'm not just a troublemaker, that I have value, that I belong. We're both imposters, Steve said quietly. Or maybe we're both exactly who we're supposed to be. And the world is the imposter. Steve smiled. You're wise for a guy who beats people up. You're deep for a guy who drives fast cars. They laughed. The bond was sealed. Their friendship grew stronger. Bruce was planning his return to Hong Kong. But before he left, he told Steve something. A secret that would haunt Steve for the rest of his life. 1971. Bruce was preparing to leave for Hong Kong. Lead roles waiting. A chance to be the star Hollywood wouldn't let him be. Steve threw a small goodbye party. As the night wound down, Bruce asked to talk privately. They went to Steve's garage. I need to tell you something, Bruce said. Serious. Almost grave. What's wrong? I've been having severe headaches. Doctors say it's stress. But Steve, I think my body is warning me, like there's a clock ticking. I feel like my time is limited. Steve's expression changed. Bruce, you're 30. You're the healthiest person I know. I know. Logically, I know. But I can't shake this feeling. And if something happens, I need you to know something. Everything I'm doing isn't about fame. It's about leaving something permanent. Proof that I existed. Because I'm terrified of being forgotten. You won't be forgotten. I'm a Chinese actor in a white man's industry. If I die tomorrow, Hollywood will write me off. In 5 years, nobody will remember my name. That's why I'm going to Hong Kong. To create something undeniable. Steve was quiet. I think about that too. All this fame, what does it mean if it disappears when I'm gone? We're both building monuments because we're afraid of death. Exactly. Bruce looked relieved. Promise me something. If something happens to me, promise you'll remember. Not the character, not the image, the real me. The guy sitting here, scared, human, real. I promise. And promise you'll tell people. Tell them Bruce Lee wasn't just a fighter. He was a person. A friend. A human being who mattered beyond the screen. Steve's eyes were wet. I promise. They hugged. Held on longer than comfortable. When they pulled apart, both had tears. I'll see you soon, Bruce said. When I come back with films that make Hollywood regret everything, I'll be here. Bruce laughed, walked to his car, turned back once, waved. Steve waved back. Neither knew that would be their last real conversation. Bruce left for Hong Kong, made 3 films, became the biggest star in Asia. But back in LA, Steve kept thinking about that conversation. About Bruce's fear, about the promise he'd made. Then came the phone call that changed everything. July 20, 1973. Friday afternoon. Steve was in his garage, working on a motorcycle. The phone rang. "Steve, it's James. James Coburn." His voice shaking. "Bruce is dead. He collapsed in Hong Kong. Cerebral edema. He's gone." The wrench slipped from Steve's hand. He didn't remember hanging up. His wife found him sitting on the bedroom floor, staring at nothing. "Steve, what happened?" "Bruce died." "He knew," Steve whispered. 2 years ago. He told me he felt like his time was limited. He fucking knew." Steve locked himself in his study, pulled out letters Bruce had sent from Hong Kong, photographs from training, and Steve realized Bruce's fear had come true. He died at 32, before Hollywood begged for him back, before he'd proven everything. But worse, the promise. Tell them Bruce Lee wasn't just a fighter. He was a person. Days passed. The funeral in Seattle. Steve confirmed he'd go, but he hadn't spoken more than a few words. His wife tried. "Steve, you need to talk. I made him a promise, to remember him. But how do I explain who Bruce really was when everyone thinks they already know? They want the superhero, not the scared man in my garage." The funeral came, July 30th, 1973. Thousands, media everywhere. Steve sat in back, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, watched as speakers praised Bruce Lee the legend, Bruce Lee the martial artist, Bruce Lee the icon. Nobody talked about Bruce Lee the human. Nobody mentioned his fears, his doubts. They were already turning him into a myth. Exactly what Bruce didn't want. Steve felt the weight crushing him. After the service, James Coburn approached. "You okay?" "No. He made me promise to remember the real him, not the myth, but I can't. Every time I try to talk about him I fall apart." "Then don't talk. Not yet. Take your time." But Steve didn't take time. He took silence. 6 months. Withdrew completely. Turned down film roles. Cancelled appearances. Friends worried. Studio executives sent telegrams. He ignored them. Because Steve was writing. Pages and pages. Memories of Bruce. Conversations. Philosophy. The real man behind the myth. Trying to fulfill his promise. But every page felt inadequate. How do you capture someone's essence in words? 6 months passed. Steve slowly emerged. Started working again. But he never published what he'd written. Kept it private. Locked in a drawer. He thought he had time. Eventually he'd find the right moment. He didn't know his own time was running out. 5 years passed. Steve kept Bruce's secret locked away. But in 1978, something happened that finally made Steve speak. A journalist asked one question that broke his silence. 1978, 5 years after Bruce's death. Steve was 48, still famous, but different, quieter. A Rolling Stone journalist requested an interview. Steve usually avoided these, but this journalist promised it would be real. They met at Steve's house, sat in the garage where he and Bruce used to talk. The interview covered standard topics. Then, "You were close friends with Bruce Lee?" Steve's expression changed. "Yes, his death clearly affected you. You disappeared for months. Why?" Long silence. Finally, "Because I made him a promise I didn't know how to keep." "What promise?" "To remember him. The real him. Not the myth. The human being." "And have you kept that promise?" "No, I failed. For 5 years I've stayed silent because I didn't know how to talk about him without breaking." "What would you say now?" Steve looked directly at the journalist. Bruce Lee wasn't a superhero. He was a man terrified of being forgotten. He had headaches, doubts, fears, just like all of us. People might not want to hear that. They want the legend. But that's not who he was. He was my friend. He was human. And the fact that he accomplished everything despite his fears, that's what makes him extraordinary. He told you he was afraid? 1971, before Hong Kong. He said he felt like his time was limited. He made me promise that if something happened, I'd tell people who he really was. That's a heavy promise. The heaviest. 5 years I've failed at it. How do you explain someone's humanity to people who've decided they were superhuman? You're doing it now. Steve smiled sadly. Yeah, 5 years too late. Bruce didn't want to be forgotten, but more he wanted to be understood, and I'm the only one who can do that. His students knew him as a teacher. Hollywood knew him as a star. But I knew him as a friend, as a human being who was scared and brilliant and flawed and incredible. What do you want people to know? That he was real, that behind every incredible thing he did was a person who doubted himself, who worked impossibly hard, who died way too young, but lived more intensely than anyone I've ever met. And I want people to know that he was my friend, my brother, and losing him broke something in me that hasn't healed. Thank you for trusting me with this. Promise me you'll print it. Don't sanitize it. Let people see Bruce as human. That's what he wanted. I promise. The interview was published September 1978. It created waves. Some praised Steve's honesty. Others accused him of disrespecting Bruce's legacy. But Steve didn't care. He'd fulfilled his promise. Finally, Steve felt like he'd finally honored Bruce. But he had no idea how little time he had left. 2 years later, Steve McQueen would die. And those writings would disappear. Or would they? November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died of cancer. Age 50, another icon gone too soon. After his death, his wife organized his belongings, found the drawer. Inside, 2 notebooks, filled with Steve's handwriting. She started reading. March 1969. Met Bruce Lee at a party. Small guy, big presence. Talked for hours about authenticity, about the performance of masculinity, about how we're both playing roles even off camera. She kept reading, page after page, stories about their friendship, Bruce's fears, his dreams, private moments nobody knew about. She called James Coburn. You need to see this. James read through them. This is Bruce from Steve's perspective. Nobody's ever seen this side. What should I do? Steve never published them for a reason. Maybe he wanted them private, or maybe he ran out of time. The notebooks were put in storage. Estate archives, accessible only to family and approved researchers. For 40 years they stayed there. Forgotten, until 2020. A Bruce Lee biographer researching for a comprehensive book got permission to access Steve's estate archives. That's when he found them. He called the estate. Do you know what you have here? This is the most intimate portrait of Bruce Lee ever written. Bruce as a human being. Vulnerable. Scared. Real. This is what Steve promised Bruce he'd share. After discussion, the estate agreed. Portions would be published. Carefully curated. Respectful. When the book came out in 2021, those passages hit hard. Bruce Lee fans read Steve's words. Bruce told me he was terrified of being forgotten. That fear drove everything. He wasn't fearless. He was full of fear. But he moved forward anyway. That's what courage actually is. Readers saw Bruce differently. Not as invincible. As a man who struggled, who doubted, who feared, who achieved greatness despite his humanity. One reviewer wrote, Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee were both icons, but these writings show they were deeply human. Both carrying fears, both finding in each other a safe space to be real. James Coburn, interviewed at 93. Steve carried that promise for 7 years. I'm glad those writings survived. I'm glad Steve's promise was finally fulfilled, even if it took 40 years. Have you read them? Some of them. Why? Because this is the most intimate portrait of Bruce Lee ever written. This is Bruce as a human being. Vulnerable. Scared. Real. This is what Steve promised Bruce he'd share. This is the missing piece of Bruce Lee's story. Steve never published them, because he died too soon, but I think he would have wanted them shared eventually. That was the whole point, to show the world who Bruce really was. After much discussion, the estate agreed. Portions of the notebooks would be published in the biography, carefully curated, respectful, honoring both Bruce and Steve. When the book came out in 2021, those passages hit hard. Bruce Lee fans read Steve's words. Bruce told me he was terrified of being forgotten. That fear drove everything, every film, every punch, every philosophy. He wasn't fearless. He was full of fear. But he moved forward anyway. That's what courage actually is. Readers saw Bruce differently, not as an invincible superhero, as a man who struggled, who doubted, who feared, who achieved greatness despite, or maybe because of his humanity. And readers understood Steve differently too. His 6 months of silence after Bruce's death wasn't a breakdown. It was grief, deep, profound grief for a friend he'd lost too soon, and an attempt to fulfill an impossible promise. One reviewer wrote, Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee were both icons, both symbols of masculinity and cool. But these writings show they were both deeply human, both carrying fears they rarely showed the world, both finding in each other a safe space to be real. Their friendship wasn't about being tough, it was about being honest. Another wrote, we lost Bruce Lee in 1973. We lost Steve McQueen in 1980. But through these writings we get them both back, not as myths, as men, as friends, as human beings who mattered to each other. James Coburn, now 93, was interviewed about the notebooks. Steve carried that promise for 7 years. He did a few interviews where he tried to talk about Bruce honestly, but mostly he kept it private. I think he was waiting for the right time. Unfortunately, he ran out of time. I'm glad those writings survived. I'm glad Steve's promise was finally fulfilled. Even if it took 40 years, the notebooks revealed something else. Something that explained why Steve's grief was so deep, why he couldn't speak for 6 months, why the loss of Bruce Lee broke the King of Cool. The notebooks contained one entry that explained everything. Dated July 24, 1973, the day after Bruce died. Written in shaky handwriting. He told me I reminded him of his father. He never said that to anyone else. But in my garage 2 years ago, he said, Steve, you're like the father I wish I'd had. Someone who sees me, who challenges me, who makes me better just by being around. I said, you're like the son I never had. Someone who makes me think, who calls me on my bullshit, who reminds me there's more to life than fame and motorcycles. We both cried. 2 grown men sitting in a garage crying because we'd finally said out loud what we meant to each other. That's why this hurts so much. I didn't just lose a friend. I lost family. I lost the person who made me want to be better, who saw through the king of cool bullshit to the scared kid underneath. Bruce died thinking he'd be forgotten, but I won't let that happen. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people remember him, not as a superhero, as a human being, as a friend, as family. That's my promise. That's my burden. That's my privilege. That entry explained everything. Steve wasn't just mourning a friend. He was mourning family. The father-son bond they'd formed in secret. The relationship that had transformed both of them. And it explained why Steve spent 6 months in silence. He wasn't just sad. He was processing the loss of someone irreplaceable.
someone who'd seen him fully and loved him anyway. The notebooks also revealed something about Steve's final months. As he was dying of cancer in 1980, he'd added one last entry, November 1980. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe days, and I keep thinking about Bruce, about what he said about being forgotten. I'm 50 years old, I've made dozens of films, I'm famous, but will any of it matter in 50 years? Then I remember what Bruce taught me. It's not about being remembered. It's about being real, about living authentically, about connecting with people honestly. I don't know if the world will remember Steve McQueen in 50 years, but Bruce Lee remembered me. He saw me. He loved me, and I saw him. I loved him. That's enough. That has to be enough. I kept my promise, brother. I told them who you really were. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not as eloquently as you deserved, but I tried, and when I see you again, wherever that is, I hope you'll tell me I did okay. I miss you. I've missed you for 7 years, and I'll miss you for whatever time I have left, but you were never forgotten. Not by me. Not ever. Love, Steve. When that final entry was published, the response was overwhelming. People who'd grown up idolizing both men suddenly saw them differently, not as untouchable icons, as human beings who'd found in each other something rare, authentic connection. A podcast host said, "We spend so much time building myths around masculine icons, making them superhuman, but Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee's friendship shows us something more powerful. Two incredibly strong men being vulnerable with each other, being real with each other. That's not weakness, that's the strongest thing two people can do." A martial arts instructor wrote, "Bruce Lee taught me how to fight, but Steve McQueen's writings taught me why fighting matters less than connecting, less than being human, less than loving your friends deeply and honestly." A film critic observed, "Both men died too young, both left us too soon, but through Steve's writings, they both get to be human again, to be more than their legends, to be friends, to be family, and that's the greatest legacy either of them could have." In 2023, 50 years after Bruce's death, and 43 years after Steve's, a documentary was released. The King and the Dragon, Bruce Lee and Steve McQueen. It featured the notebooks prominently. The final scene of the documentary, Steve's garage, empty now, but you can almost see them there, the small martial artist and the cool action star, sitting among motorcycles, drinking beer, talking philosophy, being real, a voiceover. Steve McQueen kept his promise. Bruce Lee wasn't forgotten. Not as a myth, as a human being, as a friend, as family. And in keeping that promise, Steve revealed something about himself too. That beneath the king of cool was a man who loved deeply, who hurt deeply, who valued authenticity above all else. They're both gone now, but their friendship remains, a testament to what happens when two strong people choose to be vulnerable, when two icons choose to be human, when two men choose to be brothers. That's the real legacy, not the films, not the fights, the friendship, the honesty, the love. Be water, my friends, and be real. That's what they taught us. That's what they'd want us to remember. White text on black. Bruce Lee died July 2073, at age 32. Steve McQueen was a pallbearer at his funeral. Steve McQueen remained largely silent about Bruce's death for 5 years. In 1978, he gave one interview where he spoke honestly about their friendship. Steve McQueen died November 7, 1980, at age 50, from cancer. Steve's notebooks about Bruce were discovered in 2020, 40 years after Steve's death. They revealed the depth of their friendship and Steve's promise to preserve Bruce's humanity. Today, both men are remembered not just for their achievements, but for their friendship, a bond that showed that strength and vulnerability can coexist. Steve kept his promise. Bruce was never forgotten. Final image, black and white photograph of Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee together, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. Brothers. Voiceover. Steve McQueen's actual voice from a 1978 interview. "Bruce Lee was my friend, my brother, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people remember him as a human being, because that's what he deserves. That's what we all deserve, to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved for who we really are. Be water."